It was the year 2008, early October, the start of leaf season. My husband James and I had been struggling for months. We were two sleeping under the same roof, and one night, after yet another quiet dinner filled with everything unsaid, I told him, "Let's go hiking." We picked a lesser-known stretch of the Appalachian Trail in North Carolina. It wasn't tourist-friendly. We barely found it on the map, but that was the appeal. Quiet, isolated, beautiful, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to fix things. Locals gave us the usual warnings. "Trail's tricky," they said. "Stick to the main routes. Some folks out there don't like company." I'd heard that before. Rumors of meth shacks, backwoods criminals, survivalist freaks holed up in deer camps. But James had two cousins in the army, and I'd grown up shooting my uncle's rifle out in Tennessee. We weren't stupid. We brought a GPS bear spray and enough supplies for a week. It started on the third day, right around noon. We'd strayed off a marked path just for a shortcut, we thought, and ended up on some deer trail that got tighter and tighter until the woods were breathing down our necks. That's when we saw it, a one-story cabin slumped into the hillside. The windows were dark. A muddy old Chevy truck sat in front with one tire nearly flat. James was the one who wanted to knock. "Might be able to ask for a map," he said. "Or just directions." I didn't like it. Something about the place felt off, but James was already walking ahead. So I followed. A man stepped out before we even got to the porch. Gray beard, long flannel, maybe 60, but weathered like a mountain boulder. He smiled too fast, too wide, and said, "You all look lost." James laughed it off. "Just a bit turned around." The man offered us water, said we should come inside and rest. I declined, politely, said we had our own stuff. That's when it shifted. His smile in half, eyes narrowed, and just like that, the gun was in his hand. "Inside," he barked. James froze. I did too. When someone's got a pistol pointed at your chest, your brain just shuts off. We did what he said. The inside of that cabin where newspapers were plastered across the windows. There were guns, at least 5, scattered on shelves and countertops. Handwritten notes, maps, dirty plates stacked in the sink. He took our packs, smashed James's phone with the butt of his pistol. Mine, he kept. Then he started asking questions. "Where are you from? Why are you really out here? You work with cops or any connections?" It was all spit and sweat and suspicion. The guy was twitchy as hell, pacing in circles, muttering about something. Every few hours, he'd calm down, offer us bottled water, then fly off the handle again, accusing us of lying, spying, baiting him. He pistol-whipped James the first night. Split his eyebrow clean open. I screamed, but the man just yelled louder. We were there for 2 days, 48 hours of hell. We were tied up. Every window was nailed shut. He kept the gun on his hip, a knife tucked into his sock. I thought about escaping 100 times while he slept, while he ranted, but it never felt possible. He was always watching, always listening. He started asking about James's family. "You said your cousin's in the military," he growled. I wanted to lie, but James was too dazed from the blow to his head. He nodded, said, "Yeah, Army." That made things worse. "You're the goddamn reason they're after me," he spat. "You're not hikers. You're bait." That night, he locked us in the bedroom. I heard him hammering something into the wall outside boards, I think. Preparing. For what? I didn't know. But somehow, someone had gotten a signal. My last phone ping, maybe. Or maybe James's cousin had tracked our GPS. All I know is, on the morning of day 3, we heard it. A chopper. Low. Close. The man lost it. Grabbed his rifle and screamed at us to get down. When the helicopter circled again, he dragged me by the hair to the living room window and shoved me in front of him. "You tell them to back off," he shrieked. "Tell 'em, or I'll blow her head clean off." I couldn't see the helicopter, just the sunlight cutting through the trees like a spotlight. Then a bullhorn. The man tightened his grip on me.
His gun dug into my temple.
James stumbled into the doorway, holding his arm still bruised, still bleeding. He tried to reason with him. "You don't have to do this," James said. "Let her go. Let us go." The man looked back and forth, his face twitching. "You think I'm dumb?" He pointed the gun at James. "I don't remember screaming. I just remember the sound deafening and hollow, and James dropping like a sack of bricks. Shoulder, not his chest. Thank God. But the blood sprayed. He hit the ground hard and didn't move. I thought that was it. I thought I was next. Then flashbang. Doctor splintering. The roar of boots and shouting. The man tried to run. Didn't make it 2 steps before they tackled him. I collapsed right next to James, sobbing, pressing my hand against the bullet wound. He survived, barely. 2 surgeries, months of grueling rehab. And that bastard? They cuffed him and threw him in prison. James still has nightmares. Sometimes I do too, but we're alive. But it's the memories that still bleed. This was an old story. Those days I was a part of the Appalachian search and rescue crew that got called out after 10 boys and their teachers went missing on day hike. That's right, a day hike. No overnights. No shelters. Just a quick climb up to Avery Peak and back down before lunch. In and out. Only they never came back. It started like most search and rescue calls, vague and panicked. A local hostel owner called us, said a group of foreign students hadn't returned by sundown. We didn't know much, just that they'd headed out with some adult chaperones and hadn't checked in for dinner. But then the storm rolled in. And Jesus Christ, that storm! Maine in March isn't forgiving to begin with, but this thing came out of nowhere. Temperatures nosedived. Winds went from 10 knots to 40 in an hour. A white wall that swallowed the peaks whole. That's when I knew this wasn't going to be a recovery in hours. This was going to be a body count. We learned the group wasn't just some clueless troop of tourists. They were from a German boarding school, athletic boys, 12 to 14 years old. All hand-picked by their teacher, claimed to be a mountaineer, claimed to have trained in the Alps. He and another teacher led the hike, with another faculty member staying behind at the base lodge. They weren't even supposed to be on the Bigelow Range. The actual, authorized trail was a gentle loop down low, but their teacher decided that wasn't manly enough. No, he wanted to show the boys real wilderness. So, he altered the plan secretly, took those kids up toward Horns Pond and onto the Appalachian Trail without clearing it with park rangers, guides, or even the damn weather service. We only found that out later after it all went to hell. We scrambled a recon team as the snow was still falling sideways. Couldn't see 10 feet in front of us. We kept radio contact, stayed on the fire roads. Choppers are useless in that wind. The storm let up. Cold like I've never felt. I watched a guy's eyelids freeze, mid-blink. We grid, searched the valleys, and pushed up to the ridgeline. Nothing but an eerie silence. Forest quiet in winter is bad enough. Day 3rd, we found their prints. A single line of boot tracks leading up to a ridge. No return trail. A snowshoe scout followed it and found a frozen sock. And just beyond that, scattered bits of foil and plastic wrappers. The worst was yet to come. We found the first body. It was one of the boys curled under a wind-felled pine. His face was turned toward the trunk, mouth open. He'd frozen, No gloves. No hat. Just a parka, zipped wrong and boots full of ice. His name was Lucas. He was 13. From there, it snowballed. We found another boy the next morning. He was farther downhill, face purple, tongue bitten clean through. The medics said he probably died of hypothermia mixed with panic. And then the tent. If you could call it that. A crude shelter made from branches and trash bags, half buried under snow. Inside, 2 more boys huddled together. Dead. One had a broken wrist. The other had tried to insulate himself with a notebook. We found bodies of more boys and teachers on day 7th. Together, under a spruce, partially buried, was curled around him. Those teachers killed those kids with his pride. Locals had warned them, told them storms were coming. One trailhead ranger begged them not to ascend. But those teachers wouldn't back down. Said they'd be fine. Said the boys needed challenge. No emergency flares. They led them into a high-altitude trap and locked the door behind them. Day 9th, we found the last survivors. The rest of the boys, somehow still alive, holed up in a deer hunter's shack miles off trail. One had frostbitten toes, and the others was speaking in half English, half German gibberish. They'd watched 4 of their friends die. They'd run blindly downhill, stumbled across the shack by dumb luck. I helped carry one of them out on a stretcher. He couldn't weigh more than 80 pounds, skin like porcelain, eyes completely empty. We airlifted them. They survived. Barely. When it was all said and done, 5 of the 10 boys died. 2 teachers, too. The rest suffered injuries, physical and mental, that'll follow them forever. The school tried to play it off like a tragic accident. Called teacher a misunderstood hero. He was a narcissist with a god complex who gambled with children's lives and lost. You don't take kids into mountain terrain without backup plans, without clearances, without checking the damn weather. I stayed with search and rescue another 7 years after that, but nothing ever hit me the same. I kept going back to that ridge, that frozen trail. So when people ask me, what's the worst rescue you ever worked? I tell them this. That happened in the year 2008, when I was 19 years old. I was out in the middle of nowhere, holed up in a decrepit cabin nestled deep along the Appalachian Trail. The kind of place you'd only stumble across if you were really looking for it. It belonged to a family friend, someone I'd known since I was little, who had gone off the grid long before I'd even considered the thought. She'd used it as a retreat for herself, but these days, she rented it out to people wanting to disconnect. I'm not talking about roughing it with a tent and a campfire, but more like a real cabin, albeit a neglected one. No electricity, no running water, just solar panels that worked and a wood stove that I wasn't sure would ever fully warm the place. But I had always enjoyed getting away from the world. Plus, there was something about the isolation that felt different. The cabin itself was falling apart. The wood was weathered, the paint was chipped, and you could feel the humidity soaking through the walls in the middle of the summer. I had spent the better part of the week setting up a few things to make it feel more like home, stringing up lights, organizing supplies, and figuring out the solar setup. The old TV had been there, and I wasn't sure it even worked until I plugged it in and saw the flickering screen. My main goal was to set up an old wireless AV receiver I'd brought along, a second-hand piece of equipment that I thought might let me stream some basic cable channels. It wasn't much, but it was the only way I could imagine staying connected to the outside world. The first few days were peaceful. Too peaceful, really. There were only 1 cabin, but that wasn't too near. And other than, there were no roads, no sign of human life. Most of the time, it felt like I was the only person left in the world, the only one left to care about the dusty old cabin I'd been assigned to care for. It wasn't long before I started fiddling with the AV receiver. It had been part of my goal to try and get some kind of signal, anything really from a nearby ranger station or a broadcast tower I knew was out there. I didn't want to feel completely cut off from the world. One evening, after a long day of hiking the trail and getting used to the sounds of the forest, I started messing with the receiver. I connected it to the old TV, adjusted the antenna, and fiddled with the frequencies. At first, I only picked up static. Then a blur of grainy black and white images flashed across the screen, and I froze, thinking I had picked up something from a nearby broadcast. It didn't take long for me to realize that this wasn't just some random static, it was a video feed. And it wasn't from the outside world. It was from someone's cabin inside. My heart started beating faster, my fingers trembling as I turned up the volume. The feed was dim, but the shapes on the screen were visible. I'd been staying in a room upstairs that I had set up as my own. I'd arranged it with the same basic furnishings, a simple bed, a small desk, and a few things from home to make it feel less like I was stranded in the middle of nowhere. But the room on the screen? It was completely different. It wasn't anything like what I had. My stomach dropped and my thoughts raced. I picked up the satellite phone, the one that barely had a signal and took forever to connect. I called my boyfriend, who I knew would be able to help me make sense of this. He'd been planning to visit, so I told him what I was seeing, trying not to panic. But I told him to come up anyway, telling him there was something strange going on. By the time he arrived, I'd been watching the feed for almost some hours. I felt guilty, like I shouldn't be looking, but I couldn't stop. It was like I was glued to the screen, even though I couldn't understand why. Something about the entire setup felt off, but I was too terrified to turn it off. When he got to the cabin, we huddled around the small TV and stared at the screen. My boyfriend was just as confused as I was at first, thinking maybe it was some sort of weird cable connection mix-up. But we both realized the same thing. The feed was from another cabin, one not far from ours. We'd heard rumors about a few cabins being scattered around the area, but the nearest one was a few ridges over, almost an hour's walk through dense forest. There was a man who owned the cabin, who had been renting it out to people for a while. They kept to themselves and rarely ventured out to check on the place. The idea that someone else had a setup that was transmitting a feed from their bedroom, our feed, was too weird to even comprehend. Almost 2 days. We watched it. We didn't know what else to do. I tried to reach out to the people who owned the cabin, but there was no answer. They were gone, out of touch, and all I could do was watch, feeling like a voyeur in my own skin. One night, while we were watching, something disturbing happened. A man entered the bedroom. He wasn't anyone I recognized from the cabin's regular renters. He was a plumber, someone who had been working around the area recently. We watched in shock as he wandered into the room, his eyes scanning the space with no real direction. He walked over to the dresser and started rifling through the drawers. My stomach turned as I watched him pull out clothes, his fingers lingering on them for longer than necessary. Then, he reached into one of the drawers and pulled out something that looked like women's underwear. He held them up, sniffed them, and rubbed them against his face like some kind of sick ritual. I felt sick. Frozen, unable to move. And then, in the most terrifying moment, the plumber turned his head. He looked directly into the lens of the camera. Our camera. His eyes were locked on it, as though he knew we were watching. I don't know what was worse, the act itself, or the feeling that he was aware of us. That we were nothing but spectators to his disgusting behavior. My boyfriend and I sat there in silence, staring at each other. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen, even though I knew I should have. I didn't know what to do, who to call, how to stop this from happening. Finally, we decided to act, and together we confronted the neighbors. The plumber was gone by then, but we demanded answers. A few days later, an investigation revealed something horrifying. The plumber had secretly hidden a wireless camera in the wall behind a water meter panel. He'd been spying on the couples who rented the cabin, watching them undisturbed for weeks. The police got involved, and they eventually caught him. He'd been parked out in the woods at night, sitting in a tinted station wagon, watching a live feed videos of the couples from his laptop, just out of our line of sight. Once they tracked him down, police removed every camera, wiped out every feed, scrubbed it all clean like it never happened. But I swear, sometimes it still feels like something's out there, watching. It's terrifying because even out in the wild, surrounded by trees and silence, privacy is just a fantasy. It doesn't exist. My name is Martha. I'm older now, too old, in fact, to remember all the details as clearly as I wish I could. But there are some things that never fade. They haunt you, even when you're buried under decades of time, of moving on, of trying to forget. My husband, Thomas, God rest his soul, bought that cabin back in the 1960s. I remember when he first told me about it, how excited he was, and how I, in my ignorance, thought he had finally found something that could bring him peace. He'd been running from the world for a while. We both had, really. Life in the city had taken its toll. So when he came to me and said he'd found this little place deep in the Appalachian Trail, I thought it would be the answer to everything. It was a cabin, old and isolated, surrounded by trees. He didn't tell me much about the cabin's past when he bought it, but that's how Thomas was. Always the type to rush in head first, never asking too many questions. Looking back, I wish he'd been a little more cautious. But we were both young and hopeful. The first few weeks were everything we dreamed of. We spent our days hiking through the woods, marveling at the beauty of it all. It was so quiet out there, too quiet sometimes. But I thought it was just the peace we needed. Nights were spent by the fire, and I remember how Thomas would always go on about the solitude. But then, as with all things, things began to change. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, eyes wide and wild, asking me if I'd heard it. I'd try to reassure him, telling him it was just the trees, just the wind. But I couldn't deny the unease that started to settle into the pit of my stomach. The whispers weren't like the wind. They were too deliberate. Then came the dreams. I'll never forget the first night I woke up from one of them, drenched in sweat. It was so real. The kind of dream where you wake up and can't tell if it was just your mind playing tricks or something more sinister. I dreamt of faces that weren't mine, faces that seemed to loom out of the darkness. They never spoke. There were other figures, two shadowy things that lingered in the corners of my dreams, moving with purpose, moving towards me. The dreams didn't stop. They got worse over time, and it wasn't just me. Thomas started having them too. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, his eyes wide and panicked, muttering things that didn't make sense. Even I couldn't ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. And then came the bees. I can still remember it so clearly. One morning, I woke up to find the cabin swarming with them thick clusters of bees buzzing around every window, every crack, every door. They weren't like ordinary bees. They were aggressive, angry, and no matter what we did, we couldn't get rid of them. Thomas tried everything: sprays, traps, even sealing up the cracks in the cabin. But the bees kept coming back. That was when things started to take a darker turn. I didn't know it at the time, but the bees weren't the worst of it. No, that came later. That was when we started to get sick. It was just me. A fever. Nausea, headaches that wouldn't go away, no matter how much rest I got. I thought it was just a bug, but then Thomas fell ill too. And then it spread. Our visitors, friends, family, everyone who came to see us started getting sick. Some of them, well, they never recovered. I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence, that we were both just run down from too much isolation. That's when Thomas started talking about leaving. He was never the type to give up on anything, especially not on something he'd invested so much in, but the change in him was obvious. The energy he once had was gone. He'd grown thin, pale, distant. He told me about the strange visions he was having, figures in the woods, but then I began to feel it too. One night, I went outside to get some firewood, and I saw it. A figure in the trees, barely visible through the darkness. It was tall, too tall, and its shape was wrong. There was something deeply unsettling about it, something that made my heart race and my breath catch in my throat. And that was the night we decided to leave. Years passed, and life went on. We tried to forget. We built a life in a new town, a new house. But then one day, I came across some old newspaper clippings while cleaning out the attic. The articles were about the cabin, about the previous owners, people who had disappeared. There were rumors, whispers, of strange rituals. There were mentions of disappearances, of strange deaths, of things that couldn't be explained. I never told Thomas about the articles. The cabin wasn't just haunted by memories. It was haunted by something darker. I've heard the stories. People still talk about it, the strange things that happen to those who go there.